Once welcome to Wednesday evening from the Mediterranean. And this evening we have the pleasure of having with us Sister Pratiba, joining us from South Africa. So Pratiba, man, a warm welcome to you. And I'd like to welcome you with some flowers from the region of Izmir.
Oh, thank you. They're beautiful. Shanti. Lovely to be with all of you. Thank you.
Here is Sister Özlem from Izmir presenting those to you.
Thank you.
So before handing over to Pratiba Ben, some of you may not know about her, so here's a little background. So in fact, she had a huge biodata, but she asked me just to read the very short version. So she came to Baba at the age of 15, and that was 35 years ago, so 35 years in Guyana. She's been born and brought up in South Africa physically, also spiritually. And she's served in Baba centers in Durban, in Cape Town, and presently based in Johannesburg. And as part of the Serve Africa project, she was also serving in Namibia. And I was reading also in her bio that she served in interfaith and held many programs also for women. And her spiritual inclination started at the age of 10 when she read about Mother Teresa of Calcutta. So it inspired her to come onto the spiritual path. So the topic that we have for her tonight is to do with, yes, those sanskars. And as Baba once said, that the main thing in Brahmin life is to purify your own sanskars and to learn how to manage the sanskars of others. But what is a sanskar? How are sanskars made up? If you were to put a sanskar under a microscope, what would you see? So tonight is the topic of the anatomy of a sanskar. And just a reminder, Pratiba Ben, that there is translation in multiple languages. So just to keep the speed fairly slow, please. Okay, so thank you for being with us tonight.
Shanti, and it's always such a pleasure to connect with our divine family. Just the feeling that we can be together and we are fellow travelers on this incredible journey. And so it's just so lovely that we can create the space to just share our reflections, where our efforts are right now, and take inspiration from each other. When I was thinking on the topic of sanskaras, a beautiful image that actually comes to my mind, and I'd like to just play a very short video to just sort of reflect that image when I think of sanskaras. So just bear with me as I share screen for a moment. So it's a lovely image in a way, that we come into the cycle like this amazing bud, and then with time we unfold the petals, and the sanskaras are like those petals that are unfolding. And when I was observing this, I watched several videos of an unfolding flower, so I could pick the right one for tonight. And each one of them showed something very interesting, that it opens and then there's a moment of a pause, and then it opens further. So it's almost like there's a process in which the unfolding happens. And so for me, it has been this whole thing that when we look at sanskaras, it's how we begin to express ourselves in the corporeal world. It's like we are this amazing seed, amazing potential, and with time, and there's a deep connection I feel between time and the sanskaras that emerge according to the time. I think on one level, we like to sort of sit under a microscope and look at our sanskaras and try to analyze it and unpack it. And yes, I think that was also something that I used to like doing. But something shifted for me in the way I started approaching sanskaras. And it happened a good few years ago when Dadi Ratan Mohini had visited South Africa. It was her last visit. And, Dadi has always given very deep and very specific classes on soul consciousness. And we were at the dinner table, and she was sharing that how she, in her observation, she was observing that Brahmins have the gyan, and we have many years of experience, but still the sanskaras don't quite shift totally. And so she was, researching this aspect of why we lack that total transformation. And so that's when she really started focusing on soul consciousness. And the way she defined things was a little different from how I've usually heard things being described. And, Dadi said we put too much of emphasis on mind, intellect, sanskaras. It's almost like it's something out there that we function with in a way. But she described that how the soul is the master, and that my ability to create thought is what she described as mind. But she kept on saying the soul is the sovereign, the soul is light, the soul is might. And when I create thought, that is mind. When I reason and understand and perceive, then that's my intellect. So when I had a moment with her alone, and I asked her, so Daddy, I understand, I get what you mean when you're saying mind and intellect, but what are sanskaras then? And she looked at me and said, they're nothing. And I was a bit I said, okay. And then she said, in a way, it's like, it's just the impressions that we begin to carry, and the experience that we have that we begin to carry, that then begin to become a basis on which we then engage, and the way it filters our perception and our experience and our way of engaging with the world around us. So I started looking at sanskaras in a way that it's almost like we come into the cycle for two key things. One is to give expression to who we are, and number two, it's also to experience who we are. And it's that expression and that experience and the residue of that experience that begins to sit within us. And it's like when we first come into the cycle, there's such we're so deeply connected with our core qualities, and the core qualities, like our innate energy in a way, and the expression of those core qualities, I feel, is what then becomes the original sanskaras, which then I begin to express myself through, but also then I begin to experience myself through that sanskaras. So with that context in place, it is like that original petals opening, and how beautiful it is and how fresh it is. But with time, how it loses that total beauty. But according to time, that different aspects emerge from within the self. So my sort of take on it now is that I'm not into analyzing the sanskaras too much, finding out where they come from, why they're there, and what's created them, and that kind of aspect. It's like I'm working with a different approach to it, and that really is that, number one, it's about acceptance of the sanskara.
So excuse me, Pratiba, just a request from translators to go a little slower, please.
Slower. Okay, sorry. So yes, looking at sanskaras, my approach has changed, and so not to so much analyze them. I think the time for that is over. And for me now, it's really about accepting that those are sanskaras I have to deal with, but rather to focus on where I want to be. Rather to focus on the awareness and the consciousness that I want to strengthen in myself, that I want to develop in myself, that I want to awaken and emerge in myself. It feels like when the flower has completely bloomed, it's the time for shedding the petals. And in a way, it's like we've had our whole cycle. And so now is the time of just shedding and returning to essence. And so it's like releasing the identification with the sanskaras and really focusing the intellect and the attention on the vision that Baba has given us, and really embracing that on a deeper level. So that has been sort of my focus and my take to rather look at where I want to be, rather than where I've come from, in a way. One aspect that Baba often highlights and tells us, is be Swadarsan Chakradari, that really spin the cycle of self-realization, become aware of who and what you are. And it's a lovely exercise in a way that I did a while back in meditation, and just with very internal sort of reflection, connecting in terms of what I feel is my core quality, my core quality, or sometimes I like referring to it as my core energy. What is my internal spark, in a sense? And so when I sort of started looking at that, it's just begun to help me recognize that what resonates most strongly with me. And for each one of us, we have the original qualities of the soul which are in all of us. But there's one aspect that really is something that we all hold a very deep connection with. And I found that it's like the analogy that I like using is like if you look at an orchestra, and within the orchestra there may be 50 to 60 different instruments, but each instrument has its own unique sound, its own unique frequency. And for me, this whole thing of becoming Sudarshan Chakradari in a way is one level to connect with what is that unique chord within me, that unique sound within me, that unique energy within me. And when I sort of connected with that, and so for me, it was really truth. Truth is like when I reflect back, it's something that is very dear. It's very important. It's very it's like my foundation in a sense, what I strive for. And then I started looking at that quality and seeing myself throughout my cycle, and how I express that quality, how I use that quality, how the expression of that also changed. And it helped me understand in one way that how that particular energy, when it becomes Raju Pradhan, what it begins to look like for me. And when it becomes Tamo Pradhan, what it begins to look like for me. And that gave me a sort of a nice awareness as to what triggers me, and also what inspires me, what motivates me, as well as what triggers me. So I found that that's important and very useful to actually look in myself and see, what is like that core energy in me, and how I've tried to express that. And sometimes when I've failed to express that in its totality, how it affects my own self-respect in that way as well. So for me, our sanskaras are very linked with that inner core quality. And so now what we're aiming to do in a sense, and in a way is I recognize that it's about going back to the pure experience of that again, and almost experiencing that quality again very deeply through my relationship with Baba. So that is the key aspect. And so when we look at it, and I was just churning on it in a way that what creates the shift for us from silver age to copper age, and we can begin to see that how the original sanskaras get merged, and how other sanskaras emerge for us as a way of coping with the change in drama. And one of Jagdish Bhai's classes a long time ago was very interesting, where he shared that it's like the first trace of a vice from the silver age to the copper age, he said, was preference. And I thought that was fascinating, preference. Just to say, I prefer this, or I like this more than the other. And how that sort of drew us into further and further body consciousness. But when I looked at that aspect of preference, it's like when I prefer something, then inadvertently I'm rejecting something else. So I like this, but I don't like that. I want this, but I don't want that. I want to be with you, but I don't want to be with the other. And so at a deeper level, I think our deepest, Baba uses this word dharma. And he said your swadharma. So going into what is my original internal not just quality but principle. That's what I like looking dharma as, my original internal principle. And a deity is, Baba often says that the highest religion is of non-violence. So a deity, love and peace is at the heart of a deity in a way. And so the moment there's preference, it's like I'm violating that deeper principle of love and also peace, because I'm rejecting. And rejecting in a very subtle form is like an act of violence. So when we begin to see that from the Copper Age onwards, at a very subtle level in the beginning, but we violated in a way what we hold as our internal principles. And so because of that, it was like it led to us feeling compromised. It led to us feeling betrayed by ourselves, never mind anyone else. And as a result of that, then we build coping mechanisms. And that's where we begin to find all the other sanskaras coming through. So just recognizing that, how coming back to these two principles and really, observing the self in that sense. For me, I feel the most important sort of nature for a Brahmin in a way is really to become very introspective. So, just learning to keep the lens inwardly focused. Because when I begin to observe the self, and there's three levels of observation that I feel are important. Number one is observing my thinking. And, Daddy would always tell us, the pillars for her was truth, honesty, and cleanliness. And then she, in the later years, also spoke a lot about simplicity. But when I started looking at truth, and in a way, it's very sort of an aspect to look at the self and to observe, and observing my thinking, that how much of my thinking is aligned with what Baba's telling me. Because what Baba tells me is eternal. And that which is eternal is the truth. Truth is eternal. Truth doesn't change. It always is. And so that first level of just observing the thinking around that. And a key aspect of this thing of becoming introspective and observing the self is, I think it's the attitude with which we do it, which is very, very important. And part of that is that there's a kind of first thing is kindness and compassion for the self. That where I am now is the inevitable result of becoming Tamopradhan. And we all had to become Tamopradhan. That's just part of our journey in the cycle. So not to hold that judgment against the self because of the sanskaras that emerged along the way, but just to recognize that, okay, that is what I have now, but how do I deal with it? One lesson that I learned, and that was that I can only really detach from something when I first accept it. And so just the acceptance of my sanskaras is very key in then taking accountability for it. And then I can release it. Then I almost claim the power over it to be able to release it. When I don't accept, then the tendency is to project. And as long as I project, I have given my power away to the sanskara then. So acceptance of the sanskara, and so the first aspect is looking at my thinking. And just keep checking the thinking and aligning the thinking. Sometimes it's in little things that I find where the attention is needed. Often you find that when big things happen, Brahmins remain pretty stable. But it's in the little day-to-day irritations that come up, that's where we lose it a little bit. So it's in the little things to actually check. Because as I refine my thinking in that little things, that's when I'm beginning to release myself from an old pattern. Sanskaras, time, and our karma it's like a deep link between the three. And we find that according to time and according to situations, it's like there's like a gravity that pulls for our sanskaras. And that's where the observation is important, being introspective and observing the self, so that I watch my thinking, and then I recognize that what is happening there, and then it gives me the chance to shift the thinking. The second thing that I find that is also very, very important, and that's the aspect of honesty. So being an observer of the self, but observing the self with honesty. And for me, that has been very much about one level is the quality of my thinking, but more subtle than my thoughts also, I find, is like becoming very conscious of what I'm feeling. And I find that our feelings are more subtle, but we can't lie to ourselves about our feelings. With our thinking, we can still justify, we can still sort of, create some kind of logic around it or whatever. But feelings are feelings. If I'm not feeling great, if I'm not feeling completely loving, if I'm feeling even slightly irritated, that's what I'm feeling. And I can't lie to myself about it. In body consciousness, we've blamed others for the way we feel, but I think we all now at a point where we realize that it's my own creation. So the aspect there again, own your feelings and see them for what they are. And then I find that what is very important as a process for the self is that as long as we sustain the feeling by finding reasons for the way we are feeling, it's like we sustain the sanskara. So it's like acknowledging that it's there, but now releasing it. And to release it, it's really about, I find it's just conversation with Baba. I find that works most powerfully and most deeply. It's like my honesty with Baba is what will give me the power to go beyond the sanskara. And it's almost in a way, I think, it's like when we acknowledge what we're feeling and we know it's not 100% in a way, and we go with it to Baba, it's like it teaches us humility. And it also it frees us then. It's just really a beautiful process of just handing over to Baba through my honesty. So I do it, I write to Baba, or I sit with Baba and I just share that, and it's like acknowledging, taking accountability for it, but then also releasing it in that way. So very much linked with the feelings I hold inside is then it helps me then to create the cleanliness that is needed in me and in my heart, especially in terms of my relationships with people. And so what I find that key thing that we needing to deeply work within ourselves in a way is that as we cleanse the attitude, and for me a checking point really is to see, is my attitude clean or not, is just to see how much of acceptance is there in my attitude and to what extent is there judgment. And it can be a very subtle thing, where I judge in whatever level. As long as there's judgment, it's like there's the ego, there's the fear, the insecurity that is creating that judgment. So it's like I keep it quite simple for myself in a way to say, am I totally accepting this right now for what it is, or am I judging in any way? And if I'm judging, it's like judgment is always based on some level of assumption or projection in a way. So that has been another element that I've really kept for myself in a sense, to see that keeping that attitude clean. And I think what I have been sharing really ties back to the key thing that Baba has always told us in a way. And I think it was a Murli a few Sundays back where Baba said the essence of the study is awareness. Because in a way, the more that I step back and just observe what awareness am I holding, then it's like it's either awareness or sanskaras. And if I'm not being aware in that moment, then I'm operating from my sanskaras. And our sanskaras right now, it's mixed. We have traces of the Sato Pradhan, we have lots of Raja Pradhan, and Tamo Pradhan, as Mohini Didi says, I think we've moved away from a lot of that, but there's still mixture in our sanskaras. And so I just keeping that sort of checking point for the self. Am I being aware in this moment, taking that pause and just reflecting? Otherwise, I know that there's a mixture of sanskaras that I'm operating from. And I mean, some sanskaras have served us, but it's like their time is over. I think the one thing that I really would like to share here in a way is that the feeling for me right now and the way I'm processing things for myself in a sense is that everything has a moment for it. Even our experiences, there's a moment for it, and the next moment we have to sort of let go of that last moment to be very present for the next moment, because the next moment is new. And I want to share an experience here just to emphasize that, because I think what happens for us is um, we have one experience and we tend to carry that. We tend to hold on to that, and sometimes that becomes the filter with which we want to see the next moment, or the next moment we use it to justify that past experience, and so we tend to keep holding an old energy, which I feel is what the sanskara really ends up being then. But it's like the time now is really to really refresh ourselves and be very present in the moment, in a way that, am I aware, am I connected, so that I can be available for what now requires, without trying to bring forth what I had before me. So the experience I want to share is of Daddy Gulza. Daddy Gulzai had come to South Africa, and at that stage I was living in Cape Town. So during the day we had an opportunity to take Daddy a little bit around sightseeing, and in Cape Town we have a very beautiful aquarium there. It's the Two Oceans Aquarium. So you see the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, because that's where the two oceans meet. So the aquarium shows the different sort of sea creatures and sea vegetation that happens, and it's quite spectacular the way they've made it. So when we took Dadi to the aquarium, she was like a little girl in Wonderland. She was so amazed by everything she saw, and there was a tank full of crayfish, and we told her, Daddy, people eat this, and she couldn't believe it, that is what they ate. But she was so completely like wonderstruck by everything, the colors and the creatures, and the way the kelp danced in the tide, and everything was very lovely. And when we finished off, we brought her to the center, and there were already 2 or 3 guests that we had invited to come over to have a lunch with Daddy. These were like IP kind of souls that were in Cape Town. And it was just amazing when Daddy came. She came and refreshed herself, and when she sat in front of these guests, it was like literally the aquarium was out of her intellect, and she was completely present with them. She didn't even make one reference to anything from what she saw, what she experienced, and yet in that moment she was totally present in that. And I was just observing her and fascinated, but that's it, like just this practice that whatever was, and now is another moment. And so just holding that awareness and becoming present for that, so that I'm not using old sanskaras, but that I'm becoming present to allow Baba's energy to flow in that moment. I'm letting my awareness, my intellect be influenced by what Baba is sharing. And that brings me now to what Baba shared in the Sunday's Murli, which really struck a chord for me, because Baba in a way said that he said the divine intellect has been given to you the moment you took birth as a Brahmin. And free yourself from influences, the influences of time, the influences of body, influences of the environment, the atmosphere, your sanskaras, the sanskaras of others. And it almost like quieten down all of that. And when you do that, then Baba said the divine intellect will do the work it needs to do. So in a way, just the effort right now, the focus right now, I think it is about becoming more still, more quiet, and more aware and more connected, so that this noise, and even the noise of my old sanskaras, doesn't cloud me, but it becomes more quieter. And then what needs to happen will happen. the right thought will come, the right action will happen, the right experience will emerge for that moment. So yeah, really just feeling that that's the key thing. And I think in terms of now, it's like time and the energy, it's like now rather increase your capacity and then just observe what begins to emerge for you and what begins to do the work that needs to happen for you in a way. One aspect that I find that is key is that in this time, in a way, when we become like the bindu, come back to essence of just being, rather than thinking and trying to recreate, is also like how we need to refresh our sense of ourselves every day. I may have had sanskaras, but it's like today I'm not going to define myself by my past sanskaras. I'm aware, but I won't, not to allow it to create sort of a definition of myself, because that's when I limit myself. So I am just really working with this whole thing that, refresh the self, refresh how I see myself, refresh what I, even do things differently. Don't do the same things you always have done. I think personally, I'm also sort of letting go and in a way just becoming more open in a way, keeping the focus on my internal effort and just observing what emerges in the drama, because I think we need to be available and not so much in a way trying to project from what we know, but just to be very available and connected and clean and still, and then watch as things emerge how Baba wants to use me. And I think it's like this transition for us now from Brahman to angel, and this transition from Brahman to angel, I feel, is like the angel is just completely surrendered in a way that just allows God to move, to use the angel as what the need is. Angel doesn't think and chooses, but rather just stays clean and available. And so for me, that's what it is now. It's like, yeah, the sanskara's there, and the less I give it that attention of trying to process it too much, I think the less power it has. Recognize when it's emerging, but then just refocus. Don't cave into it. So sometimes, when I need to do something, whatever, I ask myself, okay, what am I giving power to right now? Is it an old habit? Is it an old perception? Is it an old attitude? Or is it that I am creating a very clear aim of this thing of just being light and available and with Baba? And so letting, so just shifting, not giving that energy in the way I used to, but really just shifting and just watching what emerges and stepping into the moment as it emerges without thinking too much. So Daddy Janki always used to tell us, don't think. And I used to always wonder, Daddy, how do we function if we don't think? But I think I'm learning in a way that it is really about being clear within and just being still within, and the right thought will come for the right things. And so just being available and increase my capacity. So, deepen my stability, deepen my inner peace, deepen my compassion, um, so that as I work on that, then being available to what the next scene emerges. So yeah, those were some of my thoughts around this thing. So yeah, I didn't really go into an analysis of sanskars, but really just recognizing that it's 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 time not to go into too much of process, but really just to be aware, but shift focus, and then the rest will happen as it needs to happen. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm sure there are a couple of questions or comments. I'll be very happy to see what you'll have to share as well.
Yeah, thank you, Pratiba. When you raised a number of points there, I like this idea of just increase my capacity and just be available. So if somebody has a question, please do type it in the chat box. In the meantime, as usual, let me kick off with the first one. You mentioned the word acceptance. Very important to accept whatever old sanskar there may be there. But can you say something about the difference between acceptance and accommodation of that sanskar? And in a way, feeding it and allowing it to persist. So what's the difference between these two things?
I think when I think of acceptance, it's really this keeping this bigger picture of understanding that this sanskara that I created in a way was a coping mechanism. It was for the sake of survival that the sanskara was created. So, because of body consciousness, there was some level of insecurity or whatever, and therefore I created this sanskara so that I could maneuver myself in the drama and create a sense of safety. But accepting that that's what created it, but recognizing that it doesn't serve me anymore. It had its time, and that's why in that time I created it, but it doesn't serve me anymore. And in a way, it now diminishes me rather than allowing me to grow. So when I accommodate it, I make excuses for that. Something that Brother Marcelo once shared, which was very interesting. He said, many times we say, oh, because my parents were like this, so they treated me like this, that's why I've created this sanskara, because there's a way of dealing with the situation. He said, but blaming your parents has an expiry date. And I think I like that expression that Marcelo Ba used, because it is true that many times we accommodate and sustain sanskaras because we find reasons for why we created them. But to know that their time is over now. And so it requires a level of determination to not to be hard on the self because I have that sanskar, but also to know that the determination is now that it doesn't serve me. And so it's time for something new and fresh, and stepping out of it from that perspective.
Okay, so here's a comment, and perhaps you can comment on this. Somebody says, being aware, but changing the focus, I find it very subtle and not so simple, because one gets entangled since the sanskar is very emerged and is used to governing. So being aware but changing the focus. Anything more on that?
Yeah, I think in one way, it's linked with what Baba highlighted in this last Sunday's Murli, because when I'm aware in a way, I'm recognizing it. I'm recognizing the sanskara. I'm seeing it for what it is. But then it's also about, you know, awareness always brings me choice. And I think that's the key to always remember that when I'm not aware and I'm operating from the sanskara, I don't have choice. It's like I'm entangled in the gravity of that sanskara. But when I'm aware, it's giving me choice in that moment. So I find that when I see the sanskar coming up in that time, and I'm aware, but I'm maybe feeling the fullness of it in that moment. But it's at that moment to just tell the self, I need to give myself some space here. And I need to give myself the space to refocus, to do something that's going to help me to change my internal energy, which is very important. I think being aware of the sanskara and then not doing something to counteract its influence doesn't then serve me in a way. So I become aware of it, and whatever then the next thing to do is, maybe write, or sit with Baba, or go for a walk, and just give yourself some time to not act in the usual way that you would, so you're not feeding that sanskara. So I find that let the awareness serve you in encouraging you to actually do something different from what you would usually do. So that you disempower that sanskara and not keep feeding it. Yeah.
Okay, no other questions in the chat, so I'll throw another one towards you. Once Baba had said in one Murli about 3 steps, 3 stages in terms of finishing the sanskars. And he used the example of Ravan. And he said stage 1 is like to kill Ravan. Stage 2 is to burn the body. And stage 3 is then to throw the ashes into the Ganges, or into the river. And he said, unless we throw the ashes, sometimes, they come back to life again. So how would you understand these 3 stages, and what do they really mean?
Interesting. You must share that Murli with me. I can't remember having read that Murli myself. But yeah, I would say, firstly, to actually destroy the sanskara is really to recognize the root of it. And for me, in a way, what I've worked with, in a sense, is that every sanskara is almost sometimes reflecting what I really need to, or what I really long for as an experience within myself. It's like there's a virtue that's the opposite of that vice or that negative sanskara. And so for me, the approach that I have taken, in a way, is that to actually kill the sanskara is to actually rather to focus on what is it that I need to build in myself, so that sanskara becomes irrelevant. And so that's the first aspect, to stop feeding that sense of lack. But as I refocus on taking from Baba what I feel is the deeper need in the soul, then that desire, that need dies almost in a way. So that's killing it. And then I think when Baba's saying burning it, to burn the sanskara, it really, it's that deep yoga. Because sanskaras are like impressions of experiences that we've had. And what happens is that even if I've managed to reduce its influence, sometimes something in the drama can happen, and it may trigger a memory. And so that sometimes can give it life again. So Baba says you only incinerate your sins in a way, or you only really begin to absolve those impressions in you through yoga. And for me, what does yoga really mean in a way? It's really the experience of deep love. It's when we really feel, the more and more I feel more deeply secure in my experience of love for Baba and Baba's love for me in a way. It's very beautiful how Baba said with his life and his heart he comes to serve us. So really to take the fullness of that love, because it's that experience of love then that removes the memory of the old experience. Now, Daddy would always say, forgive and forget. And it used to become a bit of a challenge because in South Africa they said we'll forgive but we won't forget. And part of the thinking in this country was so that the old atrocities are not repeated. But Daddy always said, if you don't forget, then you haven't really forgiven. And so for me, it's also this whole experience that when we create a new experience of a deeper security, a deeper connection, a deeper fullness with Baba, then that experience, then it sort of destroys the influence of the past experience. And so that for me what the burning is all about, that you incinerate it into ashes, and it's only the fire of yoga, the fire of the experience of love that does that for one. And then giving it to the Ganges, the ashes, I'm not too sure about that one. Maybe you have an idea on that one, Brother Yogesh.
See, let's think about that. I guess it's when really, the feelings, as you mentioned, the feelings have really gone. So your heart is no longer in that particular tendency or behavior. It's an indication that it's really come out of the soul and real transformation has happened.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our time with you. So firstly, big thanks for sharing, and some very good comments in the chat about great clarity, and now is the moment of awareness. Would you like to see who's been with us tonight?
Yes, it'd be lovely.
Okay, if we go to the gallery view,
Yeah.
open your cameras.
Hello. Wonderful to see the whole family.